Hi everyone, welcome to this brand new series by PwC, a great collaboration between the US firm, the UK firm, and our global team. We've got Alex Ruhl here and myself, and we will be hosting a wonderful series of talks for you over the coming months. But what we wanted to do with this session, which is going to be completely spontaneous, we only organized it in the last hour. Yeah, exactly. We thought we'd introduce ourselves, say hi, get your views on what you want to hear about, because what we'll do with this series is we'll take a little bit of a different approach. We won't be prescribing things very specifically. We won't have a set series of topics or agenda items or scripts that we go through. What we would like to do is hear from you about what you want to talk about, what you want to discuss, what you think are the really exciting emerging technology issues out there. And then we'll bring guests from all over the world to make that conversation happen. But without further ado, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself? And then I'll do the same afterwards.
It would be my pleasure. Hi, everyone. Super excited for us to be kicking this off, as Jeremy said. I guess, just to rewind and give you a bit of a picture of how I ended up at PwC. I'm the newbie, right? I joined about a year ago now. I started in industry. I've been kind of building immersive experiences for the better part of a decade now. Put my first VR headset on in like 2015, back when it was, all tethered and you needed like a really expensive, chunky PC to run anything decent. And even then, decent was, a low bar, let's say. But it's amazing, right, to watch how things have kind of come on leaps and bounds in even just the space of, the last few years, even seeing like the acceleration of adoption, the quality of experiences, the ecosystem of creators, developers, and now even more excitedly, especially since I've joined PwC, seeing the adoption from industry and business. How are people using this and actually getting real tangible value, right? We've moved beyond the kind of initial, it's kind of a cool gimmicky tech, into actually this is saving money, this is increasing efficiency, and actually it's probably the future of computing, as we all in the industry kind of agree. So I kind of, I transitioned from startup world to, big PwC world about a year ago. And my primary role at PwC now is to engage with our clients and our partners to help understand that business value and identify what those key case studies are and what's going to move this medium forward. So that's a little bit about me. But Jeremy, what about you? Why don't you talk about your background? Because it's very different to mine.
It is indeed. But between us, we have actually a beautiful combination of the startup world and the corporate world. So my experience has been mostly in the corporate space. I joined PwC in 2011. And believe it or not, I was an auditor when I joined PwC. And it has been a massively weird and winding path over the last decade or so into immersive technologies, which is what Alex and I are really excited about these days and have the privilege of pushing within PwC globally. So I started out as an auditor. I then moved on to business recovery. So I was involved in various projects, helping to restructure and recover businesses in the United Kingdom. And then I realized that I had a real passion for technology and I wanted to see that through. So I found my way into the newly founded digital and emerging tech team. I decided then and there that virtual reality and augmented reality was really the place that I wanted to spend all my time. It is an incredibly fascinating technology. And what you'll find in this conversation, as well as future conversations, Alex and I share this exact same passion. So whether you want to call it virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse, spatial computing, immersive tech, XR, extended reality, all those beautiful terms, it doesn't really matter what you want to call it. The technology, if you have experienced it, is pretty magical. It has applications in the consumer world, in the business world, and it is just such an incredible, experiential, visceral piece of tech that I said, from now on, this is it. I'm going to specialize in this area, and we're going to pursue projects in this space. Now, PwC didn't necessarily agree with me at the time. This was about 10 years ago. And understandably so. It was early days, and to some extent it is still early days for such a technology that has the potential to change the world. But I carried on, spent about 4 years campaigning in the firm, and then eventually managed to start, with official approval from PwC, the first virtual reality, augmented reality team globally. And that was in London. And that was fantastic. And so things have been going from strength to strength since then. And it's an absolute pleasure to have Alex on board working with us. Other things to mention very briefly, I wrote a book about the use of VR and AR in business. It's called Reality Check, if you want to check that out. And between us, Alex and I have been running various projects in different industries, different companies around the world. And most importantly of all, we've had a lot of incredible fun doing it. So Alex was actually one of our suppliers back in the day. So I don't know what this was, 2016, 17, maybe something like that, Alex?
Yeah, around that time.
And you were writing scripts for us for 360 video productions. And then eventually came on board as a 360 video director. So for those of us who are not aware of this technology, this is quite, maybe Alex, do you want to briefly talk everyone through 360 video, and then we'll talk a little bit about our vision for the talks?
Yes, and all of you industry folk in the chat, refrain from 360 isn't VR, because that could send us down a whole wormhole in itself for this episode. But yeah, I mean, you know, most people that joined the industry back in those days, I think generally people were coming from either a gaming background or a film background, right? And they're never the two should meet kind of thing back then, right? You were either creating photorealistic 360-degree video, or you were creating, you know, CGI, game engine, interactive kind of game-based projects. And so I started my career very much in the film side. My background before even, you know, the VR headset found its way onto my little head was in television. So I always worked in the kind of narrative, entertainment, script writing, you know, that kind of medium. So my first foray, I guess, into kind of creating work in VR was absolutely 360 video. And back in the days, actually, where some of you will remember this, where there was like, you know, it was so early that there was no one camera that had, you know, multiple lenses. It was literally like sticking some GoPros together on a 3D printed rig and hoping to God that when you press record, it wouldn't just randomly stop and you'd get into the, you know, the edit and be like, okay, we have one usable shot.
And I have that 360 rig that you created, 3D printed back in the day, Alex. So Alex has kindly donated that to my future museum, which hopefully one day will become a thing. I've got virtual reality. I've got over 30 virtual reality headsets, some that go back to the 19th century. And we can talk a little bit about more. It's one idea for a future talk.
We've got a bit of memorabilia with us today.
Yeah.
You master. But, you know, this is, you know, and yeah, I mean, I know we're zigzagging around here because I'm getting excited. That is essentially how me and Jeremy essentially, you know, came to work together. Was I was creating 360 content. Jeremy was exploring how VR content was going to kind of like, you know, transform business and work kind of place culture. That's how we came together. But it's interesting, right? Because I was thinking, like, I was like looking at some of my old kind of VR kit before we started. And I was thinking, this concept isn't new, right? Like this is from what, like the 80s, like 70s, something like that. The concept of immersive, the concept of like humans wanting to connect and wanting to have like a fully encompassing immersive experience is not new. And I know, Jeremy, you did quite a lot of research into that in your book, right? Into like the history of all of this. So maybe we jump off there, because I feel like, you know, the conversation around like immersive right now is very much tied to the hype cycle. It's like, is it in the news anymore, right? So, you know, should I be paying attention to it based on like different headlines? Whereas actually what I prefer to do is like look at the adoption cycle of other technologies, and also look at, you know, how long this kind of tech has been in the making, and the fact that now we're at a point where technology and the components that actually build the hardware itself are feasible. They're at a price point that are feasible to make this mainstream. Sorry, I'm rambling. Go for it, Jeremy.
No, these are really, really good points. And you might notice a few people appearing on screen here. These are our viewers from different parts of the world. So hello to everyone. Hi, Nicholas. Hi, Lloyd from Colombia. Julius from Florida. We've got Mark Sage, who I believe is based in the UK. Good to see you. Yeah, really appreciate having you all here. It's fantastic. So please do comment as we go through this live stream. If you just want to say hi, go for it. If you have questions you want to ask, if you have recommendations for talks, we will 100% take your recommendations into account as we think about what future episodes might be. So we would love to hear your view and perspective. And yeah, let's build this beautiful series of talks together. But going back to the topic, Alex, around the history of virtual reality, really, really exciting. And you could, I mean, depending on how far you want to go back, you could go back to the beginning of humanity itself with storytelling, right? And we've had chats about this, you know, mostly philosophical at this point, because we're not really talking about technology. But if you want to talk about it from a technology perspective, you can certainly go back to the 60s. And that's when it started to appear in academia, when you started to see experiments being conducted in defense. Obviously, a big industry for this technology initially and even today. But yeah, it's a lot of people think this is new and this is a fad that will disappear. And people have been saying this is a fad for the last, 30 years now. And yet it is still here. It is not yet what many would consider mainstream, but that is understandable when you think about the depth of cultural challenges and technological challenges that we have to try and step through to make this technology seamless and usable and create a pleasant user experience at the end of the day. This is ultimately the big problem that we're facing with the technology. It's not that it doesn't have value. It absolutely has value and has proven its value for many years now. But if you think about a balanced scale, where on one side we have value and on the other side we have all the friction that comes along with it, you know, the cost, how easy it is to use and so on. At the moment, you know, it's a little bit imbalanced, and therefore the equation is difficult for a lot of people to get their heads around. But depending on your use case and depending on how you want to push it, it is absolutely a valuable technology today and has been for many years now. So it's certainly something we're both excited about, and we're in this for the long run.
And I think that's something that we would love to, and we would love, again, to hear from all of you in the chat. I can see the comments lighting up, and this is really, really exciting. So many people joining from all over the place. But this is one thing that I'm curious to hear from you guys. Like, what are you seeing out in the industry, right? Like, what are you seeing as these use cases? Because I often have conversations with people in very specific things where they're like, what are you talking about? Like, this stuff is like flying, because actually it's been proven in such a specific use case, and it's proven its return on investment. It's proven that it's, you know, increased kind of, you know, emotional connection to content, or it's helped with work culture when you're kind of working with global teams. It's got these very specific use cases that when they go, right? And people tend to be, I always think that tends to be when someone's experienced good, especially virtual reality, right? When someone's experienced good virtual reality, it's very hard to kind of dismiss it, because I think anyone can see the power of it. Like you're saying, Jeremy, it's just about that kind of, like, for businesses especially, where is that tipping point? Where is that balance that makes it then really business as usual?
That's the key problem, isn't it? Good virtual reality. Like, many people may have experienced a form of virtual reality, but how do you control that quality? Because this actually has been an issue for many years now, going back to the VR of the 2010s. I say that like it's, you know, it's been decades ago, but it feels like an era very far gone by now. Back then, you know, there were massive usability issues with the technology, far greater than what we're experiencing today, and a lot of people got burnt massively from trying really bad virtual reality. And as a result, they don't want to try any virtual reality nowadays, because their experience has been totally tarred and tarnished by that past experience, which is a shame, really.
And it's interesting, you know, even I was at an event last night and there was a comment from someone about, oh, like VR, like I've only really seen, you know, I've like kind of seen that in the context of walking through a shopping mall and seeing someone do it and thinking, oh, I would feel really self-conscious doing that. And so almost like that first kind of perception of it has like almost, oh, that's that technology that does that, and you do it in a shopping mall and it's this big public thing, and you know, you're kind of like, you know, look a little bit silly maybe, when actually we all know that when you're facilitating virtual reality correctly and you're rolling it out in a really considered way. And I know we've got, you know, a couple of people in the chat here that are very familiar with that, like Bertie, who, you know, who has been in this industry as long as I have, for sure, like running events and things like that, and making sure that people have a really safeguarded, really great special experience. They don't feel overwhelmed. They don't feel silly. They don't feel like, you know, I think the big thing is that they don't know what they're doing, right? Because I mean, again, we can use whatever term we like, but if we're thinking about this as the next computing platform, we have to think about the fact that, you know, how how kind of difficult was it, especially for people used to keyboards, to get used to touchscreens? That wasn't just like an overnight thing that, oh, all of a sudden we all know how to use these devices where we actually just use our finger rather than actually typing on a keyboard or using a mouse. And that's the jump we're making here. And I think people don't necessarily understand the scale of what we're trying to do with this, and seeing lots of the hardware providers try and solve that is really interesting. And, you know, again, it's come on leaps and bounds in the previous years. But
you know what some people might say, Alex? Some people might say, okay, but we've moved user interface before. We've moved from keyboards and mice to touchscreens and so on. So why is it taking so long to move from touchscreens to a more spatial computing-like device? And I think the issue with that type of thinking is it's a completely different modality. So whether you're talking about touch screens, keyboards, mice, and so on, or versus input like a head-mounted display, all of a sudden we're moving now from a device that is outside us, not connected to us, to one that is really intimately placed over our face, firstly. Secondly, in the case of pure virtual reality headsets, a device that disconnects us from the current reality, the space that we're in right now. And that is another massive issue when we consider the cultural bounds we got to get over to reach mainstream adoption with this technology. Yeah. So really interesting. But I see one question actually came through from Rose. So thank you very much for that, Rose. We'll highlight that here. And anyone, if you're posting on LinkedIn or Twitter, just feel free to write a comment. And if it's a question, we can highlight it here and answer it now. Yeah, if you have any ideas for future talks, as we said before, feel free to put those in too. So Rose, you're asking, why are we focusing on, I believe you mean immersive technology here, specifically when AI is now at the forefront? And I think this is a really valid question to ask. And if you look at the news right now, it's not only that artificial intelligence is effectively has taken all of the oxygen in the room from a public interest perspective, it has also captured investor attention. So the last statistics I saw have shown AI investments that were 10 times even more versus the immersive investments that we're seeing right now. And the reason for that is, and I think it's, well, to answer your question, it's not about us focusing on one or the other, but it's about how do we bring these technologies together? Because it's not, we shouldn't be looking at these in silos. I agree. So this talk series is called Immersive Tech Talks, but we are absolutely keen to bring in other technologies and talk about how they all intersect, particularly with stuff like virtual reality and augmented reality. And I think when we start thinking about that, we start thinking about how does augmented reality, IoT, and artificial intelligence all come together to add even more value, we'll find that these technologies are more than the sum of their parts.
100%. And Toby made a comment here about, you know, we've got AI cows in our Stonehenge experience, if that helps. And, you know, that perfectly, to me, summarizes the fact that these technologies are not kind of like, it's not either or. Actually, what I think of when I'm thinking about kind of AI and how it's going to kind of impact and where it kind of converges with XR is more about what was not possible before at scale that can now be because of AI. In fact, I was having a chat with our head of product and technology over in the US, Joe Harrington, recently, and he gave this perfect analogy, which I'm definitely going to steal just now. But Joe, I've given you credit if you're watching this. He said, generative AI to the metaverse is what smartphones did for YouTube, in the fact that YouTube was just a website, right, with content on it, but actually the pipeline of creating content was really difficult, right? It was cumbersome. You had to have like a separate camcorder. You know, you had to kind of like be a little bit of a whiz with editing. Like it was a platform that was good, but really YouTube didn't achieve scale, and it didn't become, you know, the beast that we know it today in terms of like user generated content and scalable, I guess, you know, the amount of content that's produced, until we all had devices in our pocket that were essentially a movie studio, right? A camera that was as good quality as the kind of thing that your parents would have used to, use to kind of like film you during your childhood, or, an edit software. I mean, I remember the first time being able to edit a video on a train thinking this is mind blowing, because I remember when I first learned to edit as a teenager, it was literally like, I had to have a special computer, and my parents bought me a license to Final Cut Pro for like 3 months, and I got to, had to learn how to use it. So I think that's really interesting from a Gen AI point of view. What is that going to do to the production pipeline? I think I saw Bertie Miller's made a comment earlier around the fact that, how do you kind of determine between personalized bespoke content versus off the shelf? I think AI is going to solve for a lot of that, because actually you can take something that is relatively off the shelf and make it bespoke using generative AI. So actually, I would say that probably the AI, the disruption we're seeing now will actually lead to probably better outcomes for the adoption of immersive tech. That's my opinion, though. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and we will definitely. I feel we have enough material here for a dedicated session about the convergence of emerging technologies. So I feel like already through this discussion, that is one talk that we will schedule. So really appreciate everyone bringing this up, and I'm also seeing some wonderful comments here. Of all sorts of areas. So we've got people talking about AR, VR, IoT, haptics as well, which is an area we haven't touched upon. Really interesting. So for those of you who don't know, haptics is separate from immersive, but also connected to it. It is the study of how you create a sense of touch or feel in a different environment. And so that's, you often see haptics gloves being introduced with VR headsets and so on. Really interesting space. There's been a lot of advancement recently in how that technology has come about, and there are multiple ways to go about that. So that could be another area we talk about too. So, but yeah, to your point, Alex, I think convergence of emerging tech is incredibly important. It's something that we can no longer ignore. It is not... we can't think about technologies in silos. We can't have a dedicated, let's say, specific team that works only on this and only on that. I think we need to start thinking more cohesively, think about how this all comes together, and ultimately how it adds value to both the business and the consumer world.
Agreed. Now, I've seen a comment from Ben Huss here about the Vision Pro. Do we want to go there? I mean, it would be hard to do an immersive tech talk without talking about the elephant in the room, which is, Apple finally kind of talking about them getting into the game. So what's your thoughts on Ben's question?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So on one hand, it's important to note that Apple as a company have in the past released a lot of products that were not first movers. So they weren't innovations per se, in the sense that they had been invented and brought, the concept had been invented and brought to consumer markets before. However, if you look at the past and the traction they've had, they have managed to increase market share to a large extent through the products they've released. And that, I believe, is a result of the investment that is made in the user experience. So again, we talked about virtual reality and the user experience earlier, and we talked about how it's really important to have a seamless user experience. This is an area that I think Apple could really help with. But on the other side, there are there's a lot of skepticism in the market about the price point that they're introducing it into the market as. And I think that would certainly make it a little bit more of a difficult proposition. But if you compare it to other vendors, we've got different vendors in the space. We've got Meta, we've got HTC, we've got Pico, vendors based all over the world with different headsets at different price points. It is important at the end of the day that we have a range of price points that fit different segments of the market, because it is not just one price point that will push virtual reality, augmented reality, spatial computing into the mainstream. We have to be able to cater to multiple price points and multiple consumer market segments. And when we have multiple segments, we open it up to even a greater population of people. So I think that is a really important contribution to the space, although it will be massively criticized from a price point perspective by some segments.
Yeah. And I think, to that point as well, like, I think what's interesting is looking at the fact that Apple are coming in at that price point with a very much a focus on high end, very incredible kind of like breakthroughs in resolution and graphics, right? And very much a focus on the individual experience. Whereas I feel like, what I see from Pico and Meta in their new headsets is it's absolutely more about, possibly more about shared, right? It's about shared experiences, about adoption from like a kind of broader space of, okay, you've got one headset and now you can actually use that with a team of, 10 on a regular basis, right? Or you could, if you've got a particular use case you're using a headset for, it's not exclusively for one user. It's not just a workstation like your laptop, right? It's not like a laptop or a phone which is yours, and it would be weird if you tried to kind of like give that off to someone else to do something. At the moment where we are, whilst we're still developing and understanding these key use cases, I see the ability to have, a fleet of headsets, as we do, that we can use in multiple different instances. We can load different types of content and have that kind of agility. And I think what's going to be interesting is, I imagine that the Vision Pro will come in and be kind of a very specific kind of job roles headset of choice, just in the same way as, for example, in certain industries, you see something like a Microsoft HoloLens still being like the headset of choice, because there's key things that cater very specifically to certain use cases. Like, for example, I often hear that the Microsoft HoloLens, still with its kind of ability to flip up, is really handy in certain contexts when you're in a situation where actually health and safety is really important and you don't want to have something that is constantly covering your face. So I also think it brings kind of breadth to your point of the industry. And more than anything, right, it's validation. I think a lot of people were kind of like, still after all these years, looking and saying, well, immersive tech, not really sure that's going to be a thing. I think Apple coming into the game with their Gen 1 product is a big signal for all brands to say, okay, it might not be like at scale yet. It might not be that you rush out and buy, 1 million headsets tomorrow for your organization. But actually, all of the big tech players are looking at this as the next evolution of hardware. So actually, you should probably be taking this pretty seriously now.
And we are 27 minutes in now, and I was kind of expecting this just to be a jump in, say hi to everyone, leave after 10 minutes. Hopefully we get a comment or two. But I'm struggling to read all of the comments that have come through on LinkedIn here. So thank you very much to everyone that jumped in spontaneously. We didn't have any advertising around this. We just thought we'd jump on, we test the technology. Maybe we'll get a few people saying one or two things, but it has been absolutely fantastic. So we massively appreciate all of your interaction in this first episode. It's not even the first episode. It was kind of a prelude to the first episode and a bit of a tech test. But thank you all so much nonetheless. And we have got all your comments. We will definitely take them into account. You may see some of your topics being talked about in future episodes now, and we would love for you to join us on those episodes. We'll send out more information shortly. You'll receive, similar to how you saw today on LinkedIn, you'll see an event and you can join that. Our first one will be in 2 weeks' time. So we'll have episode 1 on August 17th, Thursday, at exactly the same time as it is today. So that is, if I'm not mistaken, Alex, 4:30 UK time, 10:30 Central time, 8:30 Pacific time, and 11:30 Eastern time. You can tell I've been in the US now for a good few months. I'm definitely learning that all of the time zones. Very proud to show off that knowledge.
And are we allowed to kind of tease what that episode might be about? Because I feel like most people in this chat, from what I'm seeing, they're probably going to be interested to join in that conversation in the Q&A.
Yeah, so the first episode, before we had all your ideas, we had something that we thought we'd bring in, and we were going to talk about what has happened to the metaverse. And we're going to talk about it from a terminology perspective, as well as from a industry perspective and a consumer perspective, because there are multiple lenses to look at this with. And so I don't want to spoil it too much now, but we had that one in the bag at least, just in case we didn't get any comments. But judging by what everyone said here, we have many, many episodes, and we may actually need to consider doing very regular jump-ins on LinkedIn to run and go through everyone's ideas.
Love it. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to now read all the comments I didn't get a chance to read whilst we were doing this today.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So thanks all. See you later. Bye-bye.